Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Tour of Faiths. The month of July is our fun month that we visit all the different faiths and we learn all sorts of things. My name is Christina and I'm with Atlantic Institute. Tonight we have with us one of our new independent dialogue coordinators. Her name is Rory. She put this together for us and she has brought Father Francis McCarty with us to have a conversation. And I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Rory. Any questions that you guys have, you can go ahead and stick in the chat and we'll ask them as it comes up. But I'm going to go ahead and let Rory introduce herself, introduce her guest speaker.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Rory. I am a college student from Vermont, and I have Father Francis here with us, who is a Benedictine monk at the St. Anselm College Monastery, where I attend school. So he's going to tell us a little bit about life in the monastery and the process of becoming a monk, and answer some of the questions about tradition and all that good stuff.
It's time for me. Okay.
Sorry.
Good evening, everybody. It is a pleasure to be with you this evening to take part in this conversation and to take part with you all in hopefully a nice discussion and dialogue. As was said, my name is Father Francis McCarty. I am a Benedictine monk and Roman Catholic priest. And I am a member of St. Anselm Abbey, which is a group of Benedictine monks in Manchester, New Hampshire. We operate, with a lot of help, St. Anselm College, which is a private Catholic undergraduate college in Manchester of about 2,000 students. And we proudly have Rory as one of those students. And so, Rory, remind me again what your major is.
I am a nursing student.
Rory is in our very fine, nationally renowned nursing program here at St. Anselm. I actually am joining you this evening, not from Manchester, but instead from what was my childhood bedroom here in North Smithfield, Rhode Island, that my father has converted into an office. So I am on vacation with visiting my family this week. And so that's where I'm coming to you from this evening. So there is a lot that there is a lot to cover. There's a lot more that we could cover. But I want to talk to you a little bit about Benedictine monasticism as a tradition within the Roman Catholic Church through the lens of me, how I got to become a Benedictine monk. I guess you can start at the beginning. I grew up in Northern Rhode Island. I'm the oldest of 6 children, 3 boys, 3 girls. I grew up in a house built by my great-great-grandparents in the late 1800s. So I was the 5th generation of my family to live in this house. And the house is in the shadow of the parish church where we went to church every Sunday. And so, but a lot of my life was centered around the church because it was right there. I grew up in this little village. It was a square mile. It used to be a mill town. And you were very interconnected to everybody in the neighborhood and in the parish, not because it was so small, but because of the nature of mill towns and immigration. I was also related to 80% of the people in the village. They were either first, second, third, or fourth cousins, depending on who you talked to. It was very difficult to date. And so I grew up in that village, and the church sort of influenced everything I did. But the one thing that I learned in that context is that the church, as I understand it, requires and has people from all different backgrounds, people of all different temperaments, genders, races, everything. And that everybody has a place there, and that it in fact takes all kinds of people to further the kingdom of God, which is the mission of the church. I say all this because never in my wildest dreams would I have thought, though, that Benedictine monasticism is is the role that I would play. I went to Catholic high school, Mount St. Charles Academy in Woonsocket, Rhode Island. It's a famous school for hockey, if anybody plays hockey. And then I started applying to colleges at the end of high school, like everybody does. I applied to 6 colleges. I got into 1. And the one college that I got into was St. Anselm College in Manchester, New Hampshire. I went to college there. I majored in history. I got to know, and this was honestly the day that I moved in was the first time I had ever seen a Benedictine monk, and was the first time that I thought Benedictine monks didn't exist. I thought like, oh, Henry VIII took over England. He did the dissolution of the monasteries, and Benedictine monks were gone. I had no sense that Benedictine monks still existed. And so over the course of my 4 years of undergraduate, I got to know some of these men and really formed relationships with them, and knew that there would be relationships that would last a lifetime, that these were important relationships, these were important mentors that I had, not just as college professors, but as just folks who I met in college. Our monastery is right on the campus of the college. It's very, very difficult to avoid the college when you're in the monastery. It's very difficult to avoid the monastery when you're in the college. We're right there, right in the thick of it. I graduated from college, not even thinking for a moment that I would ever be back there as a monk. I graduated in 2010 in the middle of the global economic meltdown, so didn't have a job. Worked a couple minimum wage jobs for a couple of years. And then actually my high school, Mount St. Charles, hired me as a faculty member. And so I taught 7th through 12th grade. I taught both theology and computer science and English for 4.5 years to 7th through 12th graders. I also served as the school's assistant director of communications, and I ran their website. Over the course of those 4.5 years teaching, I came to discover for myself that I was looking for something that I didn't have. And what specifically that is, to put a name on it, is very difficult, but I make no bones about it. I loved my job. I loved the work that I was doing. I loved the people that I worked with. I loved the students. None of that was bad, but I knew it wasn't exactly what I was looking for. And I was going through a pretty difficult moment, couple months trying to figure this out. So it was sort of like this. I felt like I was in limbo, like this sort of, So my best friend from college, my friend Eric, he finally pulled me aside one day and he said, listen, when you were in college, you made some retreats at the monastery, which was true. And he goes, it seems to me whenever you did that, you came out of those retreats with a real sense of clarity and purpose. I was like, okay, fine. And so then he said to me, so stop bothering all of us and go on retreat and figure it out. And I did. That's exactly what I did. I went on retreat at St. Anselm in July of 2014, and had a really powerful moment where I said, you know what? I don't know if this is exactly it, but if I don't try this, I'm going to regret it. And so the following July 2015, I entered the monastery at St. Anselm Abbey. So I've been there for 9 years at this point. So what did I get myself into? That's a great question. So I'm going to share my screen here. I hope it works. So we here at St. Anselm, we follow the rule of St. Benedict. So this is, if everybody can see that, this is St. Benedict. St. Benedict was a 6th century monk living in Italy who wrote a rule for monasteries. And so we at St. Anselm, 1,500 years later, we still follow his rule. St. Benedict is considered the founder, the father of Western monasticism, right? So a lot of people, when I talk to a lot of people and they hear that I'm a monk, they think what? They think I'm a Buddhist. They think that I'm best friends with the Dalai Lama. I would love to be best friends with the Dalai Lama, but I'm not. Those are Eastern monks. I am a Western monk. So in the Catholic tradition, but the origins of Christian monasticism actually began in the deserts of Egypt in the 3rd century following the crucifixion of Christ. So Christianity was a persecuted religion in the Roman Empire, and folks fled to the desert to escape persecution, but also to live a life of solitude that would allow them to have a very deep, intense relationship with God. Several decades, several centuries go by, those individual solitary hermits start to live in communities. Another few centuries go by, we have St. Benedict, who is in Italy, and by that time, what we call Cenobitic monasticism. So Cenobites are monks who live in groups. Cenobitic monasticism has spread to Europe through St. Martin, who's St. Martin of Tours, and a gentleman by the name of John Cassian. St. Benedict takes several different rules for monasteries that he's aware of, and he takes the best bits of all of them, and he puts it, and his own wisdom, and puts it together in his rule, and that's what we call the Rule of St. Benedict. It is a rule that is 73 chapters long. It contains some very specific instructions, but also some very broad ones. So for example, he devotes almost 12 chapters to on Monday you pray this, on Tuesday you pray this, on Wednesday you pray this. But then a lot of things he doesn't mention at all, or even at the end of those 12 chapters that are very specific, at the end he says, if you try this and it doesn't work, try something else, what you think is best. So it's known for both its proscription, but also for its discretion and for its flexibility, which leads in the 9th century for Charlemagne, the great king of the Franks, to release a decree that says if you run a monastery in his kingdom, which was basically all of Europe at the time, if you run a monastery in his kingdom, you are to follow the rule of St. Benedict. That is how Benedictine monasticism spreads to the world. Benedict grew up in Italy. He was the son of noblemen. He was sent to Rome for college, didn't really care for it, thought that the culture of Rome at the time was very decadent and not very conducive to a life of a Christian. So he fled to the Italian countryside. He lived as a hermit for a while. And eventually other monks find him and say, will you be our abbot? Which is, an abbot is the leader of a monastery. Abbot coming from the word abba, meaning father. So what ends up happening is he founds this very famous monastery. This is the monastery of Monte Cassino in Italy. It's the site of the very famous Battle of Monte Cassino, the World War II battle. This is a very new picture of the monastery. It was destroyed, in fact, by Allied bombing in World War II because they thought it was being used as a Nazi Axis power depository armory.
I just want to say that's beautiful.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful building.
It
Up
was
on the
not,
top.
it was not being used as an armory. And when the Allies found out that they bombed a bunch of monks and didn't actually bomb a military target, they went, oh, we're very sorry about that. And they funded the entire restoration. So that's the product. If you're from the United States, the United Kingdom, or France, this is the product of some of your tax dollars. So, so that's the monastery that he founds in Monte Cassino. It's still there today. There's still monks living there. There have been monks continually there for over 1,000 years. Monasticism spreads. I'm going to stop my share for a second here. Monasticism spreads throughout the world. It comes to the United States in the 1840s. A man named Boniface Wimmer comes from Munich in Germany. He comes over to the United States and settles in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, which is just outside of Pittsburgh, and founds St. Vincent Arch Abbey, which is the first Benedictine monastery in the United States. From there, his monks would go on to found about 25 or 30 other monasteries in the US, Canada, Mexico, Puerto Rico, and Brazil, Colombia, and Venezuela, including my own St. Anselm in Manchester, New Hampshire. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about Benedictine monasticism. And I'm happy to answer more questions. And again, it would take, to explain everything takes more time than I have, but I would encourage you, the Rule of St. Benedict is readily available online in many different languages. It's a simple read. It's a quick read. When I say 73 chapters, I tell people they're like Dan Brown chapters. They're very, very short. They're like a couple paragraphs each. So the whole thing in total is maybe 45 or 50 pages, maybe, depending on how big your font is. So it's well worth a read. And in fact, a lot of folks in the last 50 or 60 years have taken the rule and they've tried, and people have written books about adapting it to corporate structures, business structures, other communal environments. What can we learn from the rule and use in places that aren't monasteries necessarily? So
yeah, I actually wanted to just say, in support of that, we read it in school during my freshman year, and it is a very easy read. And I am outside of the Catholic faith, so it was brand new to me. I was not raised in the Catholic faith, and it is very easily digestible and very insightful in philosophical ways as well as religious. So highly recommend.
I call it first and foremost a great way of teaching people how to live together. And it could be anybody living together, because if you think about Roman times when Benedict was writing, you had people who considered themselves to be noblemen, right? They were from aristocratic families. You had folks who were soldiers. You had folks who were poor, destitute. Well, in Benedict's monastery, all of them were welcome to live there, to become monks. And so he very quickly says, well, we gotta take all of these class distinctions and we've got to even them out. Everybody is the same in the eyes of God, right? And so it is a very interesting read and a very interesting way of thinking about how to live together in a community. So that's what I got myself into 9 years ago. I lived in the monastery for about 4 or 5 months. I observed the monastic schedule, which I'll talk about in just a minute. Lived life in community, ate meals there. I took a couple of courses in our college. And then in January of 2016, I entered the novitiate, which is the easy way of talking about it is it's monastic boot camp. So at that point, I was given the habit, which is what I'm wearing right now. Okay. And I was given a new name. So I was not born Francis McCarty. I was born Ryan McCarty. And when a man or a woman enters monastic life, they are asked to take on a new name as a symbol. And it's you can see this happened all throughout the Bible. Simon becomes Peter, Abram becomes Abraham, right? It's a sign that you are taking on a new life with God. And so I took the name Francis in honor of St. Francis of Assisi. And so I've been Francis for the last 8 years. And in that year of novitiate, monastic boot camp, I met every day with an older monk. We met 7 days a week for an hour, and we went through the rule, all 73 chapters. Benedict is very clear about newcomers. He says, when a newcomer comes to the monastery, you must show him everything about this life so that he can make an informed decision about, is this what I want? Is this where I'm supposed to be? So in that year, I met with Father Peter, a very dear man who's now gone to God, but I met with him every day, and we went through the rule, and it was a real journey of faith and sort of a distillation of everything in my faith life up until that point sort of got boiled down, and I understood it, and it came to a real essence of, who am I? Who am I in relationship to God? Who am I in relationship to other people? And what do I want to do with my life? To answer the last question there, I came to the realization that I want to be a Benedictine monk. For Saint Benedict, a Benedictine monk's first and really only task in life is to seek God, to find God in this life and prepare oneself to be with him in the next. And so I, in 2017, made temporary vows as a Benedictine monk. So you make vows for 3 years. The vows that I made were obedience, stability, and what we call conversatio morum, meaning a commitment to converting evermore to a monastic way of life. That every day when I wake up in the morning, I'm going to say, how can I be a better monk today? And then I'm going to try and go do it. And if I do it, great. If I fail, that's okay. Because tomorrow when I wake up, I'm going to say, how can I be a better Benedictine monk today? I vowed obedience, not just to my abbot, my superior, but obedience as Saint Benedict understands it. When you live in a community, all the community members must have mutual obedience. They must be obedient to one another. They must, as he says, be the first to try to outdo each other in charity. They must try to outdo one another in charity. And then I profess stability, which is a very unique vow. It's one of the a unique vow to Benedictines. I took vows to a place. So I said, I will be here, St. Anselm in Manchester. So I made those vows 3 years. I then entered seminary to study for the priesthood, because that's a separate calling. Not all monks are priests. Not all priests are monks, right? But sometimes monks and priests can be the same. And so I entered seminary. I was in seminary for 3.5 years, and then the pandemic hit. So then I did my last year of seminary on Zoom. I learned how to say Mass on Zoom, which is not great, but that's all right. We live with it. But one of the things that I did do right before we shut down the world is I took solemn vows, which is, after the 3 years, I said, this is it. I'm going to do this forever. I'm going to be a monk forever. So I made solemn or permanent vows. And this was that day at St. Anselm. This is our Abbey Church. And you can see there were a lot of people there. This is a pre-COVID audience. This was February 2nd, 2020. So you'll know that almost 30 days later, we shut down the world. And if I zoom in, there I am, kneeling before my abbot, making my vows. It was
That's a great
wonderful,
Zoom.
yeah,
That's great.
it was a wonderful, wonderful day.
That's a great picture too. So yeah.
So I'm going to leave this photo up for a moment because I'll talk about this space too. One of the things was great was my whole family was there. Again, as I said, I have 5 siblings. We now, since COVID, we now average being in the same room about once a year all together. And so this was one of those times. But I have a brother in the military. I have a sister and sister-in-law who do global health work in Africa. And I live in Manchester, New Hampshire, and I've taken a vow of stability. So I tell my parents, you'll always know where I am. I don't mean to be morbid or macabre, but I sleep 100 yards from where I will be buried. And I don't find that to be morbid. I find that to actually to be very comforting. That's already been decided. I don't have to worry about that. I can worry about other things. But so I took solemn vows there in February of 2020. I was ordained a priest in September of 2022. And since August of 2021, I have served in the campus ministry office at St. Anselm College, where I am currently the assistant director of the office. And it is our task, it is our mission to help every single one of our community members have a relationship with the divine. Would I love it if all 2,000 students and all of our community members were Roman Catholics? I would love it. But it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. And that's okay. What I hope for our students and for our faculty and for our staff is that by the time they get to the end of their journey, or by the time they have exposure to our way of life, that they recognize that God is present in their lives. And however they choose to whatever they choose to do with that is up to them. And as I say, and Rory knows this, we're here to help.
Yeah, and I can vouch for that. It's been very unique of an experience for me because a lot of our school is Catholic and practices Christianity. And as someone who didn't, I kind of, I would say, explored. I went to different services. I went to, my favorite thing is the Luminaria Mass, which is a mass that's a remembrance for those who we've lost. Then I ended up joining the Delight Club, which is for all females, and that's been like the most wonderful thing. So I have ended up connecting a lot with religion through that exposure, but it's amazing because it's definitely not forced. It's all just learning.
Yeah. Our philosophy is very much, we're going to lay the table for you. We're going to set the table for you of what we believe is possible, what we think is possible with a relationship with God and with a relationship with Jesus Christ. Feel free to pick, feel free to sit down and eat, whatever you want to do, right? That's our hope, that's our philosophy. I've gone way over my intended time limit, but what I want to do just to end is it's maybe to answer a question in advance, because it's the question I get all the time. What do you do every day? So I'll give you a typical day. As I said, we have St. Anselm College is our main work. So that's a part of this as well. So I'll give you my typical day. I am up every day at around 5 o'clock in the morning. I am with my other monks. We are in church, ready to go at 6 o'clock for our morning prayer. During our prayers, we do what we call a choral recitation of the Psalms. So if you know the book of Psalms from the Old Testament, we divide ourselves into two groups. One side recites one verse, one side recites the next verse. And we go through the entire book of Psalms in about 2 weeks. Morning prayer takes about 45 minutes. Then we have a period of private prayer until breakfast at 7:30. After breakfast, you go to work. So I go to my office in the college, other people do their work. We break at 12 o'clock, we're back in church to pray some more. Then we have lunch all together. When we have lunch all together, we eat in silence, and one of us takes turns reading during the meal. So they'll read a section of the scriptures, and then whatever, we read a book together. Right now we're reading a book on the French Revolution. It's about 450 pages. It's going to take us about 8 or 9 months to read it, because we eat in 20-minute, 30-minute increments, and then we stop. So you get through 3 or 4 pages a meal. So we have lunch at 12, go back to work. Then we gather again At 5:15, we celebrate the Eucharist every day. Then we have dinner, same thing, in silence with the reading. We then have community recreation. We get together. Some people will read the newspaper, some people play cards, some people just sit and talk to one another. It's a very much a daily debrief. How are you? How was your day? What'd you do? What's going on? One of our traditions is, if you don't know this, the arts section of the New York Times posts the Final Jeopardy question every day, and we don't have TV. So we do the Final Jeopardy question out of the New York Times every day, and then we got to wait till the next day to get the answer. So that's one of our, little quirky traditions there. Then after that period, we're back in church for our final prayers of the day at 7 o'clock. That takes about a half an hour. And then we're done for the day. So some of us, myself included, I work a lot at night because I work very directly with students, and that's when they're available. But then after that prayer at 7, we either go back to your room, go to bed, have some more personal prayer time, some reading. You go do an event like I would do or most nights. And then the next day you wake up and you do it all over again. There are certain subtleties and changes that happen depending on the time of year, but for the most part, that's the day. And so I'll end with that and say thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you all, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much for joining us, Father Francis. And I actually had a question that came to mind while you were speaking about the solemn vows. I'm curious how the vow of stability plays into your opportunities to go on vacation and visit your family as you are right now.
Yeah, so that it depends kind of on the monastery. So that's another feature of Benedictine monasticism, is that every monastery controls their own self. So we're not really so our abbot is answerable to the Pope. He's not really answerable to other monks. So we have autonomy. And so customs and traditions vary very widely from different monasteries, but we all follow the same rule. So in our house, in our monastery, we are given time every 2 weeks. We're given 2 weeks in the summertime to go visit family, and a week at Christmas time to go visit family. But just like somebody who would be married, right? I have a family. It's my monastery. So I'm with them on the holidays. I've become, in the last couple of years, the holiday cook. So I cook Christmas and Thanksgiving and Easter. And actually I cooked on 4th of July too. And so there's that, but it's also not, a lot of people think, oh, entering a monastery, he's going to forget everybody he ever knew. No, like my family, my friends that I have here in Rhode Island are very much a part of me and are really a big reason of why I am where I am today. I tell folks about my parents. My parents never said like, oh, you're never going to be a priest. They didn't actively encourage it either, but it was always an option. It was like, oh, that's something that's going to make you happy. Great, go and do it. And so that's sort of what our philosophy. In all seriousness, I end up seeing members of my family about once a month. Either they come to me and visit, or there's like a birthday party or something or other. One of the biggest blessings in my life, though, is that for the last 4 years, my youngest sister has been a student at St. Anselm College. So I see her almost every day, which could be a good or a bad thing, depending on who you talk to. But that's been a really wonderful thing. So yeah, but yeah, no, it's not, there's renunciation, I guess you could say, of the world of, I don't have a wife or children, nor am I going to, but not an abandonment of everything that makes me who I am. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So I have a question as well. We did when I love that we define everything now pre-COVID and stuff like that. So pre-COVID, Tour of Faiths was always just in person in South Carolina. Since then, it has been kind of nice that we've been able to do virtual things like this. So I've enjoyed it. But when we did pre-COVID, we did a tour of the Poor Clares Monastery up in Greenville,
Yes.
South Carolina. And I thought what was really neat about their monastery was they did have rooms there for family to come and visit. Like because the Poor Clares, they're much older at that monastery.
Yes. Yep.
And so a lot of them didn't, sometimes they traveled, sometimes they didn't. It wasn't a very big thing for them, but they actually had some guest rooms that they had so family could come and stay for, and it was like a 2-night max or something like that.
Yeah.
And they actually even had on their property, which was very neat, they had a cabin, like a 2-bedroom cabin that was actually like no charge. It was like if you feel the need to come and have solitude and you know, like, and it was like, oh my gosh, I had no clue. Like that was just so cool. So I'm curious, does the monastery there, does it provide you any, like for family, if they wanted to come and visit you, kind of like at your home?
Yeah, so it's funny you asked this question because one of my responsibilities in the monastery is that I am the monastery's master of guests. And so hospitality in the Benedictine tradition is hugely important. If you think about the medieval times especially, and you think about the number of pilgrimages that were
Yes.
done in medieval Christianity, well, every single time, if you went to do a pilgrimage in medieval Europe and your pilgrimage was going to take 14 days, I'll bet you a lot of money that you would have stayed every night, you would have stayed at a Benedictine monastery. They were that widespread, but also that is a real big hallmark in our tradition. Saint Benedict writes an entire chapter in the rule about guests. And he says that the guest is to be received as Christ, for it is Christ who said, I was a stranger and you welcomed me. And so our monastery provides opportunities for folks to come on retreat. Our retreat rooms, as it were, are inside our monastery. So we only allow men into our monastery, just as a community of women would only allow women. It's sort of the same principle. But in the summertime, especially this time of year, with an entire campus of empty dormitories, we welcome a number of guests, including families and things like that. We had about 3 or 4 weeks ago, we had a retreat for young people. We had about 55 or 60 young people come for a weekend. They
I
lived
was
in
going
the
to say, because you can
dormitories.
use those dormitories,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Which is great. Yes.
So that's
We
a
stayed,
big part of our tradition.
we
Yeah.
did a trip, we did a dialogue trip years ago, in 2014, to Turkey, and I took an interfaith group of clergy to Turkey. My favorite, though, I will say, is I really do have a special spot for, I love campus ministers, because they have a lot of personality. They deal with kids, they deal with students, they are full of personality. And I was there with a Lutheran pastor, and he was the most hilarious. It was Frank Anderson, and he was a Lutheran pastor, and he was from college, USC in Columbia. And he just was personality, and he was just so much fun, so
Yeah,
I'm a big fan of campus ministers too.
I am too. We had one of the opportunities you have as a freshman at school is you take a tour of the St. Anselm Abbey and part of the monastery. And it was probably the first time I had interacted with monks really in this course that I took. And I'll never forget, we're going in and sitting down, and the monk who was showing us around happened to make a joke about some surgeries, and he made a joke about I don't remember what it was, but he was joking around. And I was like, wait, these are people. They're not just in their own bubble. And that was a really interesting thing for me. And now like we have Father Francis here. He runs campus bingo events, which is a really big thing at my school.
oh, I bet.
So yeah, one of the biggest misconceptions that I get all the time is that people think I sit in an empty room and read all day.
Right, yeah.
No.
No.
Very much.
No.
My task is to find God in everything.
So in Greenville, we had a friar, we had friars in Greenville.
Yep.
And Then they were moved, but there was one there, oh, I forget what his name was, and he was such a character, and he was so phenomenal and awesome. And they did all this fundraising, and they built a school in Greenville, in the underprivileged community, and put in they exceeded their goal of fundraising that between the nuns and the friars, and they put in a gorgeous school. They gave us a tour. I'll never forget. It was like the neatest thing to get this tour of this school, you know. But there's a lot of work that I see that gets done, and I appreciate your devotion to your like
Thank
your
you.
devotion, your timeline. I remember the Poor Clares. Remember we were sitting there and they said they have TV. I do remember that. I believe, yeah, they have TV. They said they see things on in the news and they sit and they pray for all of those people in the news. And she said, we pray daily for the people in the communities. If we see something in the newspaper, we pray for them. That anything that's happening in the news, we pray for them. But they sit in prayer for a lot of time
Yeah.
for the people. That was one of their jobs as the Poor Clares, to sit and just and pray. And so
One of our older monks who passed away a number of years ago used to say that at least in the Roman Catholic world, the priests in the parishes and the churches, they were on the front lines. And it was the monks and the nuns in monasteries, we were the support companies,
right.
that we're the ones who support the ones on the front lines with our prayers and other things. So yeah.
Well, we do our fair share of medieval watching programs in this house, so there's a lot of friars and monks, and I'm like, yes, there was one last night that was building a castle wall, you know.
Yeah.
She was like, we're gonna get this cement done, you know.
If you've ever read, there's a great novel that came out, I want to say now 30 years ago, by Ken Follett, called Pillars of the Earth. If you've ever read that, I would recommend that you read it. It's about a fictional medieval English monastery, but it is a very accurate portrayal of the personalities that you would find in a monastery. Because I can take the characters in that book and point at the people I live with. And
I can
so
imagine.
Ken Follett in and of himself, he's a great writer, but it's a very well done book called Pillars of the Earth.
All right, so we have two questions.
Yes.
So Barbara was asking, how are the daily expenses paid for, as well as high medical expenses? And then Cheryl was asking, do you have food or drink restrictions?
Yeah,
And
so
I'm giving you both because sometimes food and drink and medical is
yeah,
kind of
and actually we can connect all of it together. In terms of daily expenses, so I work at our college. I make a salary. I live with 29 other people, and we range in ages from 29 to 95. So some of them are retired, some of them don't work anymore, but most of us work. We draw a salary. I have no idea what I make. I have not a clue, because my salary goes right into the communal bank account. And we have a monk who serves as our treasurer, our financial officer, and he pays the bills. Part of the benefits of having my job is that I have health insurance. And so I am able to take care of myself and get the care that I need, thanks be to God. But it's very much, I don't, for example, there is no bank account with my name on it. Everything that I need is provided for. And it's provided for, and I don't mean that to be like, I can do whatever I want. It's, if I need something, I go to our treasurer. May I please have? Would it be okay if? Asking those types of questions, and they're provided for. We are able through, we're very, very fortunate in our monastery. We have a full-time kitchen staff. So we have 4 folks who work in our kitchen that provide us and cook for us every day. There's 30 of us. And so that's the main way that we support ourselves. St. Benedict, and this goes back to, there's a distinction between monks and friars. This is it. St. Benedict didn't want his monks leaving the monastery. He wanted everything, he said, everything that you need to do should be done within your monastery. So a monk is someone who lives in a monastery, whereas a friar, who would be a Franciscan or a Dominican even, they are what we call the mendicants. So they go out and they beg, they ask, could you please, provide me with food for today or with some money to get somewhere, things like that. So Benedict, the famous line from Benedict is, we will know, it is by their work that we will know that they are monks. So that's why you had ancient monasteries who, for example, Benedictines are the ones who perfected brewing beer, right? You have these monasteries, and especially in Bavaria, who would brew beer and sell it, and that's how they supported themselves. A lot of monasteries, even today in Europe, run farms. That's how they support themselves. A lot of the monasteries of the United States run higher educational institutions or high schools. So that's how they support themselves. In terms of food and drink restrictions, we observe for most of the year, we try to eat simply. We try to eat, but nutritiously, and we're very fortunate. Our chefs are excellent. I have no complaints about our food. But St. Benedict, this is one of those like specific sort of weird, very particular things that he provides for. He says in the rule, he's got a chapter on food and drink. And he says that every meal should have two options, that you should provide two options to account for people's taste. And he also provides, we don't follow this at St. Anselm, but he also provides that every monk be given what's called a hemina of wine every day. Nobody seems to know what a hemina is. I've heard a cup, I've heard half a gallon. It's an old Latin word that nobody seems to know the meaning of. So, but at St. Anselm, at least in my monastery, we do not eat meat on Wednesdays and Fridays throughout the year, as a way of fasting, but also as a way of being in solidarity with those who are less fortunate than us. I remind our students during the season of Lent, where none of our dining halls will serve meat on Fridays. I remind them that 70% of the world lives on rice and beans, and that to eat a chicken in a lot of parts of the world is a luxury. And
Yes,
so
very much.
there's a way of being in solidarity with our brothers and sisters who are less fortunate than us that I find really beautiful. During the season of Lent, we up the ante, at least in the monastery. No meat at all on Wednesdays and Fridays. And then the other days of the week, we only serve meat at dinner. So lunch is meatless during those 40 days of Lent preparing for Easter. I'm able to, I can drink alcohol. I don't, but we can. We on Sunday evenings is our beer and wine meal. And on special holidays, we have other drinks, but for the most part, it's water or milk. But in terms of restrictions, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
And it looks like someone had a question. Georgina wanted to know about becoming a priest before becoming a monk. I know you became a monk first.
Mhm.
How would
Yeah.
that fit into the process of becoming a monk if it does?
Right. So when we talk about being a monk and being a priest, there's really what we call two vocations going on. So I became a monk first, and I entered the monastery and I was like, I want to be a monk. I want to be a priest. I'm ready to go. Here we go. And I was told very quickly, slow down, stop. We have to figure out if you're meant to be a monk first. I would not be a priest. This is me personally. I would not be a priest unless I was a monk. It's just the way my spirituality is. It's the way my personality, my character is I need both of those things. I'm called, I think, to both of those things. That being said, not all of the monks in my monastery are priests, right? So in our house, we say when a man enters the monastery, we say, okay, do you have the calling? Are you being called to be a monk? Well, we've lived with you for a year and a half. Yeah, we think so. We think that this is what your calling is. Okay, now let's talk about, or let's think about being a priest. And so not all the monks that I live with are priests. In fact, the man that we just elected as our abbot, our leader, he is not a priest. And he
Can
will
you
tell
share?
you, he's like, I've never felt called as a priest. I've always felt called to be a monk. It is in some ways two different things, but the two things do live side by side very closely. Now, that being said, there are provisions, and again, this is one of those particular things that Benedict makes provision for, that if you're a priest who is not a monk, you can become a monk. And it's happened. In our monastery, it happens very rarely that someone who's already a priest would become a monk. It's happened very rarely in our history. In other monasteries, it happens all the time. In our monastery, it just hasn't happened all that much. So,
I have two questions for you. One
Yep.
is from Barbara asking
Mhm.
about if women can become monks.
Okay.
And then my second question has to do with the new abbot not being a priest. Could you discuss that process? Because that was very exciting.
Yeah. So the answer, Barbara, to your question is yes, absolutely. We call them nuns. There are
Yeah, I was gonna say there's men roles, they're abbot, monks, friars, and then the women roles are what? I was gonna say like
when you talk about female religious in the Catholic Church, you either have nuns or you have what we call religious sisters. So nuns are women religious who live in community in a monastery or a convent, and they don't leave. So these are the nuns that you know from The Sound of Music, right? They're behind the grill. They don't go into the outside world. They live in a convent. That's it. Many of those nuns follow the rule of Saint Benedict. You just take the he pronoun and change it to she. In fact, there are more female Benedictines in the world than there are men. It's actually kind of ironic. Those are nuns. Then there are religious sisters who they follow. They're members of a religious community. Some of them are Benedictines. Some of them are Franciscans. Some of them are Dominicans. Some of them are different religious orders, like the Sisters of Mercy, the Sisters of Holy Cross. They are they engage what we call apostolic works. So they're not going to sit in a convent all day for the rest of their lives and pray. They're going to be out in schools and in hospitals and doing work in parishes, doing work in the community. So those are sisters. They're both sisters, but one's a nun, one's a religious sister. It's a very specific distinction that I hear people mess up the distinction, and I don't even bother because it would actually take way longer than I just took to fully explain all of it. But yeah, there are distinctions, but the simple answer to Barbara's question is, yes, women can become monks. We call them nuns or sisters. And there are female Benedictines, again, on every continent, just as there are men. In fact, I think the closest one to me actually is in Bethlehem, Connecticut. It's the Abbey of Regina Laudis, and it is the home actually of a very famous Hollywood actress. Her name was Dolores Hart. Dolores Hart was an actress in Hollywood. She's very famous. She was the love interest of Elvis Presley in 3 of his movies. Did that and then became a Benedictine nun, and she's lived in Bethlehem, Connecticut since like 1956. She's still there. And so, yeah, there are female Benedictines all over. So
for those of you that should know, last year we had Sister Pam Smith. She's with the Charleston Diocese, and she was on one of our Tour of Faith. So on our YouTube channel, you can find the interview, the Tour of Faith with Sister Pam Smith. Also, where she explained a lot of what being a nun or a sister which reminded me of that when you said how you have a job, and so you have the expense, you have income that comes in and things like that, because she also explained that she had a job that she went to for, that she was being paid for, so that went into, and that provided her health insurance as well.
Yeah.
So because I think some people think that there's nothing, and the
Right.
church is supporting you. And
Well,
and it was interesting to know that a lot of those in the faith of this, they have jobs, secular jobs, doing things other places where they're earning income.
yeah. Now, there are religious in the church that that don't, right? So they either rely on charitable donations. I know of a group of Franciscan men called the Franciscans of the Primitive Observance. They're primarily in Massachusetts, but one of their I have a friend of mine who he was a member of their order for a week. And that's because in that week, he went dumpster diving for food 5 days out of the 7. And that's how they supported themselves. Not because they didn't want to go out and get jobs or get out and, ask people, but he said, this is how their superior was very much like, this is how St. Francis did it in 1,000 years ago. So this is how we're going to do it too. And it's like, okay, that works for some people.
Right, not all.
Not for me, not for
Right.
my friend, obviously, but it takes all kinds of people. And there's something for everybody. So,
Yeah, very cool.
mhm.
All right, it is 8 o'clock. Anybody else have any other questions before we close? Figured I will just double check. Thank you
Okay.
so very much, Father Francis,
This
for
was
being
my
here
honor and
tonight.
my pleasure.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
so much, especially on your vacation.
I
I
know,
didn't
I was like,
realize you were on vacation. I apologize.
thank you, thank your dad for giving you up for an
I
hour.
will. Yeah. Yep. I will. Thank you so much. This was a real pleasure and a real honor, and happy to talk to you. And if anybody has any follow-up questions or not sure, Rory knows how to get a hold of me, so you can contact her. So
Yeah, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Father Francis. I
you're
really
welcome.
appreciate your help.
Of course. Of
All
course. Have a great evening, everybody.
You too.